to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ido. I've been assigned with kind of a difficult task to keep you awake, number one, and after this long day of stimulating talks and discussions, and number two, to send you back home with a glimpse of hope after what we've heard about the Oslo process. So, after this last lecture of my fellow panelists here, I'm still hopeful that, we've seen intractable and protracted conflicts like the one in Northern Ireland of 800 years or so. So we still strike a chance to resolve ours. And you all know that future is easy to determine, but agreeing on the past is quite a challenge, as we've seen here. I'm probably the last speaker because I was the negotiator of the last agreement signed, official agreement signed between Israelis and Palestinians in September 1999. As Hiba, my friend, referred to the Oslo process as a series of agreements, actually 8 consecutive agreements. The last one was the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement, which was the was attempted to provide the interface between the interim period and the interim agreement and the permanent status agreement, which obviously we have not completed yet. The bottom line of my talk here, in response to the question asked in the topic of this particular panel, is Oslo still relevant? I would say, in principle, yes. The question is how. And it is rather challenging now to conceive a different future for us, Israelis and Palestinians, from this kind of gloomy present we live in. Nevertheless, we should, because the status quo is unsustainable. It leads to a reality where the two-state solution will no longer be possible. And the alternate, likely disastrous option, which is the binational state, will be all that remains. Oslo's legacy has been and still is to separate Israel and the Palestinians, the ones from the others, into 2 distinct national entities. Today, we should aim to preserving the conditions for a two-state solution. Israelis and Palestinians, you've heard that before, entered the Oslo process with different goals. I would say in general that the Israelis search for security and the Palestinians search for statehood, and both sides, until this day, came out of the negotiations quite empty-handed. Any conference, and you know that, all of you who attended this conference, and of course my fellow speakers here, on this very complex Oslo process, can hardly claim to be comprehensive or provide simple answers. So there's no simple answers, but much of those who led the initial process of Oslo, and some of them present here, I have no question whatsoever on the fundamentals of the process, on the fundamentals of the Oslo intentions at the outset, despite a lot of criticism about the architecture, etc., and we've heard all about that. The Jewish people's right to self-determination in its own land in Eretz Israel, and I have no doubt that this process was intended also to provide the Palestinian people with their right for self-determination in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. From an Israeli perspective, in the absence of any agreement until today, I believe that the borders is what we lack, is what's missing. Of course, territory is not the number one priority and the number one sticking point between Israelis and Palestinians throughout the whole process. However, in the absence of borders to encompass the core values of Israel, and I'm speaking as an Israeli Jew, I believe that we all should be concerned by the erosion of our fundamental core values as Jews, as Israelis, and the erosion of our founders' vision. We lead an ongoing internal struggle over Jewish and human values and the identity of the Israeli society. Consequently, the two-state for two people would counter growing trends of inclining to the right via extreme nationalism, via messianic religiosity, via anti-liberalism. And to me, it is very clear, as I believe it is to many other liberals and progressives in Israel, that Zionism never aspired to govern another people. So we need to secure the democratic nation-state of the Jewish people. And it is for us more critical than ever, speaking about the Israeli society, that we end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It is crucial to draw Israel's borders around the parameters of a Jewish majority and democracy, and it is also critical to draw the borders of a Palestinian state that would live and coexist alongside Israel. But we need to have a much more proactive approach than the one that we do. We need to delineate at least the provisional boundaries and along, I would say, for instance, the security fence or around the main large settlement blocks. And it will, I believe, clearly contribute from, once again, an Israeli perspective to the national security of Israel in its broadest sense. And my fellow negotiators and myself, some of them sitting here today, of course, we spent hours and hours negotiating under official and non-official heads and semi-official heads, the intertwined core issues of Jerusalem, the holy sites, the refugees, of course, the security arrangements and territory boundaries, settlements. I believe, standing here today, that there are very long odds for a comprehensive, permanent status agreement, ending the conflict and putting a finality to all claims. I believe that there's very, very slim chances for this to happen in the foreseeable future, or at least to be attained in the foreseeable future. And this is why I would like to present something that is different from this approach of all or nothing, something that is different from this approach of nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, which is the formula or the paradigm under which I negotiated, under which whoever negotiated permanent status negotiations negotiated with the other party, meaning that simultaneously you resolve all the core issues. And I believe that this paradigm should be changed today into whatever is agreed or mutually coordinated should be implemented. As simple as that. Why can't we reach a full-fledged agreement? Because the gaps in the historical narratives of Israelis and Palestinians are wide and are getting wider and wider every day. There is a lot of distrust, actually a complete distrust between the two leadership and between the two people. We are very far apart on the core contentious issues, and the leaderships do not firmly want to lead the way towards peace and are not ready to take the risks that are involved in that. However, once the dispute is eventually over, I have no doubt that it will resemble very much to whatever has been negotiated in the past, namely the Clinton parameters and later on other initiatives and other schemes that were negotiated throughout the way in the last 2 decades or so. In that respect, any initiative to revitalize the negotiations, perhaps led by the Trump administration, if it's not too much to ask, will not be dead on arrival, but only if both publics will buy in. And the latest joint survey of Israelis and Palestinians shows how to accomplish that. Ido, you referred to the mindsets and the need to change the mindsets. I totally agree. And I would like to share with you a recent poll that was recently published, the poll that relates to both the Israeli and Palestinian societies, including in the Palestinian society, including Gaza. This poll identifies policy incentives which would dramatically increase support for a new proposal. For example, 44% of Israeli Jews who oppose the two-state principle would change their minds if the Palestinian government commits to maintaining the Israeli-Palestinian security cooperation. Adding this element would increase Israeli support to 59% from the current 46% to the two-state solution. Among Palestinians who are opposed, 39% would change their minds if Israel recognized the exodus, the Nakba, and suffering of Palestinians who fled or were expelled from their homes during the 1948 war, and if Israel provided compensations to them. This provision would boost Palestinian backing to 62%, also from 46%. An incentive appealing to both sides is putting the Trump plan, or any plan, within the framework of the Arab Peace Initiative that was mentioned here before, which would change the minds of 37% of Israelis and 24% of Palestinians who now oppose an agreement. These are just a few, not tokens, but examples, demonstrating that both publics are still, even today, flexible. This poll is from the end of January, I believe 25th of January this year. So still flexible, still open to new ideas. If the Trump's team uses the survey's finding to craft a plan that will garner support by a majority of people on both sides, its proposal will be a living document. Israelis and Palestinians will be incentivized to drag their leaders into a process that would resolve the conflict throughout a territorial division into two nation states for the two people. But we need for that a balanced and a graduated political initiative with transitional phases. I'm aware of the criticism expressed in the previous panels over the interim character of the Oslo architecture, and I'm sharing this vision of at least the possibility, the initial possibility to provide a more sustainable picture of the end game at the outset of the negotiations rather than at the end of the negotiations. However, I believe that we need to reverse the trend gradually towards the one binational state, which would be neither Jewish nor democratic. And I believe that we need to draw our borders and create gradually, throughout transitional phases and interim phases, step by step, create at least a two-state reality, even in the absence of a full-fledged agreement, and change the slope towards a one binational state, at least level it, and then change the direction of the slope into a two-state reality. For this policy option to become more than just a political thinking or a wishful thinking, some would say, I believe that we must entail a three-pronged approach. What do I mean by that? We need to act regionally, bilaterally, and independently. And even without a comprehensive agreement in sight, continue in this direction while first starting a dialogue with our relatively moderate Sunni neighbors, such as the Arab Quartet members, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates. We have a lot of common concerns that we can share, and I think that we can get a better trade-off deal with the Palestinians throughout this kind of dialogue, if it is not completely disregarding the Israeli-Palestinian issue. Of course, that's subject to that. Secondly, we should act bilaterally. We need to engage in a dialogue between Israelis and Palestinians, between the Israeli leadership and the Palestinian leadership. It's 20 minutes drive from the residence of the Prime Minister of Israel in Balfour Street and the Muqatta in Ramallah, and vice versa. So this is the first thing that they should be doing, but this is not mutually exclusive. This should be incorporated within a regional dialogue and a regional outlook as to the resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I'm adding to that independent steps that could be, should be, and could be taken by either party, just in order to complement the preservation of a two-state reality and the conditions for an eventual two-state solution throughout steps that are not negating the negotiations, that are not negating the two-state eventual solution, and encourage the parties to take such steps. I believe that we need tangible traction on the ground, because people are either completely indifferent, in the case of Israelis, towards the Palestinians, or deeply frustrated and desperate in the case of the Palestinians. So we need, throughout those three prongs approach, we need to have also a visible change on the ground. We need to be capable of providing the people some hope that things are changing, not only by exchanging documents or by any international resolutions taken in the international fora, different fora, but a kind of approach that would provide a layer over layer over layer of a two-state reality, and so it would be solid enough to walk on towards an eventual two-state solution. I believe that Trump should aim to get a formal commitment and a firm commitment by the Palestinians not to further internationalize the conflict by condemnation and delegitimization and I would even say demonization of Israel in the international fora, or promoting the boycott campaigns, and to fight incitement and also the glorification of terrorism against Israelis. I believe that he should get a firm commitment of Israel not to build anything outside the major settlement blocks, and that he should get a deposit from both sides that they will not negate a process that leads to a two-state reality in their actions, in their statements. I would expect the Israeli Prime Minister to state that Israel does not have any long-term sovereignty claims outside the main settlement blocks that would be eventually annexed to Israel in exchange for a swap of land. Of course, one digit, by the way, annexation. And let's add to that the economic development that needs to be put as an indispensable factor in the Palestinian territories, namely in Gaza, of course, and would add to the region's stability. I believe that the Marshall Plan for Palestinian development, preferably led by the US, but not necessarily, should invite the relatively moderate Sunni Arab states to join in and give their shares in this action. We should also have concretized plans for the reconstruction and the rehabilitation of Gaza based on rock-solid security arrangements and within the framework of a regional and diplomatic effort. Oslo related to the Gaza Strip and the West Bank as a single territorial unit. And it is true now that the PA only yesterday or the day before, I believe that there was a very firm request or demand that Hamas hand Gaza over to the PA straight away. And I believe that this is one of the ultimate challenges which the post-Abbas era will face. But it is indispensable to look at those two parts of the territory of Palestine as future single territorial unit. Now, process-wise, as I said, it is essential to now leave aside the nothing is agreed until everything is agreed formula and replace it. I believe that by saying that whatever is agreed or mutually coordinated should be implemented at the immediate future, and this would allow for an agreement on boundaries, on security, on statehood, on economy to take place, and then in a state-to-state fashion almost get the two major sticking points discussed, negotiated in a larger context of not only Israeli-Palestinian negotiations, but also a regional one and an international one. So to sum it up, what I offer here is first a statement that the two-state for two people reality is indispensable for Israelis and Palestinians. Whoever says that the two-state solution is dead, well, I beg to differ, and I beg to differ with some arguments that I don't have the time to provide here, but maybe in the Q&A sections. Number one is this. Then, number two is that a two-state solution is in the benefit of both parties. Israel for the evolvement of the Zionist aspiration, the Zionist vision. It is consistent with the aspirations of a Jewish democratic Israel. We've heard about the jubilees this year. 120 years for the First Jewish Congress, and 100 years to the Balfour Declaration, and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I won't go over all those special dates. And I believe that this is also in the benefit of the Palestinians, because the two-state for two people provides the Palestinians with the self-determination in their own state. And it is attainable. It is attainable, but only throughout a series of transitional phases, interim agreements and independent steps, all of them compliant with the continuous negotiation process, a binding process that would be in a kindergarten, imposed on us. Not the solution itself, but just a process. We need someone to lock us up in a room, keep the key in their pocket, be a facilitator from either within the room or outside the room, but we cannot do it on our own right now. Neither Israelis nor Palestinians, not the leadership, not the societies, can promote such a process without any help from the outside. So I didn't talk about I didn't elaborate about the internal Israeli dialogue that we need to start between ourselves as to the future of Israel, not in the largest concept of the greater Israel, but after the division of the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea into two nation states. We need to talk about that. We need to talk about that throughout the participatory process and not just talk in conferences, etc. We need to reach out to every Israeli and every Palestinian, all together, 14 million people. Not that difficult, okay, those days. And change the mindsets, change the conditions of the hearts and the heads and the thinking and the political thinking, and this is doable. We need to amend the schisms within the respective societies, which are deepening and being aggravated by the developments in the last decade or so. So, if I have to give you some takeaway messages from this panel or from this conference, I would say the following. To President Trump and the international community, I would say, my message is that both sides need your help. We need you with the hands-on fashion to stay the whole course with us, not just with statements and symbolic steps and one-off kind of actions. We won't get to the ultimate deal. That's not in the cards right now, but we will get to a certain deal, and we will preserve the conditions for a future deal if we act intelligently and if we are persistent enough in following this track. I agree that we have to ask the American president to work out a UN resolution that would encompass more or less the parameters that were discussed for an Israeli-Palestinian peace. And it might be a lot to be asking from the current administration, but still, I think it is our duty to present what's right, in our opinion, and not being hostages to political constraints here and there. I call the Israeli leadership to be proactive, to strategize for peace and for coexistence, as much as they do for war and other conflict of various kind of intensity. I believe that this should take over the current incremental de facto annexation of areas that will not be part of Israel, will not be incorporated into Israel under any arrangement and any future agreement. And to the settlers, I would convey this message. You know, your mission, at least the mission for some of you, is accomplished. You should go back home into Israel proper. We will give you a warm hug. We will, on a national scale, plan your return into Israel. It's only about 100,000 people that will have to be evacuated or relocated. All the rest will stay. There are 80% of the settlers are residing currently in the main blocks of settlements. so they will not have to be relocated. To the Palestinians, if I may, I would say stop victimizing yourselves, take responsibility, decrease the hate, and stop terrorism, and address your needs once and for all. Let me conclude by reminding ourselves that as much as we've heard from my previous fellow panelists, very tough and bloody and protracted conflicts have eventually come to an end, and we've heard a lot about conflicts that were never supposed to be over, and one day they were over. I believe that ours is not anything special. Yes, it's a multi-dimensional conflict, of course. It has religious elements, political ones, historic ones, emotional ones, political ones, territorial ones, etc., etc. But it's not that different from any other conflict that one day was over because in very different circumstances, people did understand that either through leadership or through the civil societies, or both, most of the time, there is a possibility for a change. As philosopher Martin Buber wrote, direct, frank, and genuine dialogue between people of different kind and convictions is becoming ever more difficult. The future of men as men depends upon a rebirth of dialogue, end of quote. So, in my opinion, it is doable, and in my opinion, Oslo left it in our hands. Thank you.
I want to thank, of course, all the speakers for a fascinating day. We have been evaluating the success or failure of Oslo from its highest objectives. Has it met the highest standards? Has it brought peace to the Middle East? And I think we've noticed that that has not yet been achieved. But there's another way of examining how the Oslo process has affected everyday life. And I personally drew encouragement from Hiba Husseini's comments that regardless of whether or not we have peace, Israelis and Palestinians are now interacting on a daily basis at many, many levels. And that, I believe, is also can be attributed to the Oslo Accords. So there is also cause for optimism. Thank you again to all the speakers.